On this week's show, Billionaire Space Cowboys. Are they advancing the technology that gets us back to the moon and on to Mars? Or are these joyrides just a galactic traffic jam? What's up? Up there? Plenty. Let's get an update from the co-author, along with J.L. Pickering, of a stack of books with stunning photos chronicling the USA space program, including hot off the press this week, Picturing the Space Shuttle, the early years. You can get it on Amazon. Longtime space journalist John Bisney. John, as Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos lived to tell about it, and Elon Musk is the next space cowboy, I've wondered, should we have retired the shuttle? Was it technically and or economically obsolete beyond update?
I think it had just run its course, Holland. Remember, the shuttle was designed, believe it or not, in the early to mid 70s. That's almost 50 years ago. Now, it flew for 30 of those years and did a lot of good. One reason we developed the shuttle was because we needed the ability to get up and down to orbit on a relatively routine basis with a cargo capability, and the shuttle provided that. Big sections of the space station were put up and assembled, and now we have the International Space Station. Some temporary scientific laboratories were carried aboard the shuttle. But again, with the fully functioning space station, that's not really needed anymore. And then after the two disasters, Challenger and Columbia, the combination there, NASA sort of stopped putting a lot of satellites on the shuttle and devoted it more to science. So, you know, over that period of time, we lost 2 orbiters at about $2 billion each. We lost 14 astronauts. And the real problem with the shuttle is this. Yes, you could have upgraded it, continued to improve the avionics, give it a new cockpit and so forth, but it's not going to get you to the moon. You're not going to fly a space shuttle to the moon or onto Mars. So that's why the focus changed really under the Bush administration, and then it continued to have NASA develop more of an interplanetary capability and leave low Earth orbit operations more to the private sector.
Well, when you and I were kids, there were only 2 players in the space race, USSR and USA, in that order chronologically. Back to the Future, private enterprises joined in. John, is the technology that these billionaire joyrides are funding contributing to what NASA is up to, or are the heavens getting crowded?
No, I think it's real. It's a great question, and I think it's important to view these as 2 very separate baskets. I talked just a minute ago about how NASA would like to have the private sector take over low Earth orbit operations. That includes getting our astronauts up and down to the space station, which SpaceX is doing, and it may involve this fledgling space tourism industry, which you see Branson, Musk, and Bezos being involved in. But that's a whole separate thing than what NASA is doing. NASA has a longer range view and a much longer range view in terms of the destination. We're going to see, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I know, the Artemis program is designed to get astronauts back to the moon and eventually possibly onto Mars. So Branson and that crowd are not competing with NASA. They're really operating in, if you think of it, in 2 separate realms with 2 separate goals.
But they're not stepping on each other.
No, I don't think so. You know, they had to build their own launch facilities. Well, now, not Musk didn't. He's using some facilities at the Cape. But Branson and Bezos, they built their own launch pads. They said, hey, you know, we're rich enough guys that we don't need to involve the government and the military support and all the government resources that are involved in a shuttle launch, and we'll just do this ourselves. And, you know, I think it was a very, they've had 2 very successful operations recently, as we know. I think it was a big step forward. But what we're seeing here, people say, oh, big deal, Alan Shepard did that 60 years ago. Yes, he did, but at the tip of a huge government effort. These are 2 men who said, 3 men who said, you know, gosh, I think we can do this on our own. So, and what they're doing, Holland, you're seeing the marketplace responding to the perceived demand for space tourism business. And the word is they have people lined up, not you and me, unfortunately, but they have people lined up on the waiting list. So they see this as a very viable industry that they're trying to start.
I have never been prouder to be Amazon Prime. John, the epidemic reminded us how tight-lipped China is about what they're up to. But this past month, they launched 3 missions in 4 days, and we now have company on Mars. I have heard other analysts surmise that we're ahead of them and that we're investing more meaningfully than they can afford to. What is your sense of how serious a space player China is?
Oh, deadly serious. But it's a little bit like apples and oranges, I think, to compare the programs, and here's why. The U.S. operates in a very transparent way with a civilian program largely, with its basis being exploration and science. What the Chinese are doing, on the other hand, is largely driven by their own geopolitical interests and their military interests. They are developing, as we have some capability, to maybe attack satellites in orbit, to use it as a reconnaissance platform, and other capabilities. So the Chinese look at space a little differently than we do, I think. Granted, there are parts of it that we exploit too. Our military does, there's no question. But I think people like to believe we have a little more esoteric purpose for being in space, where the Chinese, they are out for the Chinese. And the other big difference, of course, Holland, is despite what you mentioned some analysts say, everything's controlled by one central office. There's no budget battle between the Pentagon and NASA or the civilian president. You know, when Chinese leaders want to do something in space, they do it and they fund it.
We are speaking with the author and longtime network space journalist John Bisney, who's been briefing us all along on the Perseverance rover and that Ingenuity helicopter. John, give us a Mars update.
Yeah, things are going really smoothly on Mars, and that's good. I think that we haven't heard any news from there because it means things are proceeding as planned. The Perseverance rover itself, very soon, maybe by the time this airs, is going to have taken its very first sample, soil sample. It will use its arm to dig that sample up, deposit it in a little container, and then put it back in its own internal laboratory for some analysis. And then that sample will be packaged up and dropped off along the way for future rovers, a future rover hopefully, to find, pick up, and bring back to Earth. How cool would that be? Now we're seeing this little helicopter pal there, the Insperity drone, as also performing very well. And what's it doing is serving its role as a scout. It looks ahead for where should we go next. And this is, I think, what some of the people at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory are excited about right now, Holland. They have Perseverance in what they call a thinking while driving mode. And what that means is essentially they say to the rover, we want you to go over there, but it's up to you to figure out how to get there. So Perseverance is using all its sensors and cameras to map out its own safe route past any rocks or travails or anything, any problem to get to where it's going. So things are going very well on Mars. I know that everybody's excited about how it's progressing. It takes a little time, but as, of course, you mentioned the Chinese have a Mars rover up there too. I don't think they'll run into each other there.
Let's hope not. The technology is so cool, and there's a lot to see at nasa.gov. John, you mentioned Artemis, who in Greek mythology was Apollo's sister, and NASA is readying the Artemis Moonshot, which would land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. As I understand the plan, the moon could become a waypoint for future Mars missions. I got about a minute and change left, John. What's the status of Artemis?
Artemis is proceeding along, pretty much on track. The booster has been stacked in the vehicle assembly building. The Orion space capsule will be installed shortly. And really, NASA is planning to try to have a first unmanned launch, uncrewed launch of this system, this Artemis system, by the end of the year. Now, of course, things slip, and that seems a little optimistic to me, but I would think in the next 6 to 7 months, you're going to see the biggest launch that NASA's ever done since the Saturn V's, and it will send this Orion spacecraft around the moon and back. Don't look for astronauts to be on board for maybe another 2 years. And then, yes, 2024 is the landing goal to put a couple of Americans back there. Again, as I've told you many times, Holland, it's just too optimistic. Maybe 2025, 2026, but it's on track, and I think it is going to happen.